Doctors of Reddit, what's the strangest discovery you made while performing an autopsy? This video contains sensitive and graphic content. Viewer discretion is advised. I shadowed a medical examiner several times, but the weirdest thing I ever saw still kind of haunts me. There was a woman who died suddenly and had all these bruises on her body. There were detectives and cops all around us because they thought it was a case of domestic violence. However, she was schizophrenic and was not on any meds. During one of her episodes, she would beat herself violently and self-inflict all of these bruises and wounds on her. But the way she died was crazy. She beat herself so much that these bruises developed huge blood clots and broke off into the bloodstream. They eventually ended up in her lungs, pulmonary embolism. We opened up her lungs and they were just full of blood clots. Her legs were full of them too. She basically beat herself so much that she suffocated. It was so odd. The first autopsy I watched as a medical student had an elderly lady with varicose veins. She was feeding her chickens and brushed past a jagged bit of wire fencing which punctured one of her varicose veins in her leg. She ended up bleeding out. If she had laid on the ground and put her leg up, she probably would have survived. I worked at a medical examiner's office for a summer. We had a middle-aged Japanese man on the slab. Lots of tattoos. His throat was cut ear to ear and was nearly decapitated. I won't get into the fact pattern as you guys could probably track down the case. Then we looked down at his junk, and there are 7 or 8 little bumps about half the size of an M&M randomly all around it. The medical examiner curiously makes a little incision on one of the bumps, and out pops a little plastic bead. I went and did some research, and it appears that genital beading is a Yakuza prison tradition representing every year spent in jail. I'm not a doctor, but a grad student in physical therapy. We did cadaver lab over the summer, but made all the incisions and dissections ourselves in small groups. When we got to the chest cavity, significant chunks of our fella's right lung were liquefied. He was a long-term smoker who died from other problems going on elsewhere in his body. But I'll never forget having to scoop brown coagulated jelly out of the chest cavity with my hands and a turkey baster. Don't smoke, kids. My wife is a pathologist's assistant, and during her schooling carried out the autopsy of a newborn that died minutes after birth. The mother was desperate for a child and had a history of multiple miscarriages at different terms. This was her first time making it full term, and all prenatal checkups revealed no problems. The delivery was difficult but successful, and the baby was alive for a short time. Skip to autopsy. All signs point to the baby being fully developed. They get to the abdominal cavity and the liver is lacerated and there's hemorrhage everywhere. During the difficult delivery, the resident used too much force with the forceps to pull the baby out. The ruptured liver caused the baby to bleed out internally. My wife was enthusiastic about autopsy up to this point, but now she has no interest. I took forensic lectures, so I saw quite a bit of crazy stuff. But the things that stick are autopsies revealing a history of abuse, pain, and violence. A skeleton was found in the nearby mountains. It was very clear he died in an accident 20+ years ago, however, he had to be identified via DNA. Turned out his dad was not his dad, but his uncle. It sparked a whole public family drama because the family was well known in my area. Please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. Let's continue. In my final year of training, we had a cadaver lab to practice advanced airway management techniques. While I was helping an intern do basic intubation, she commented the tube wouldn't pass. I think she has some kind of growth or mass in her airway. I took a look, asked for some forceps, and pulled a half-eaten hot dog out of her larynx. It had been embalmed along with the rest of her. Cause of death identified. I worked at an animal hospital and they did necropsies for zoos all the time. An alligator died, they shipped it to the hospital and refrigerated it to stop the decay. They took it out and put it up on the table. After doing all the paperwork, they started opening up the alligator. After the first cut, the alligator opened its eyes. Turns out it wasn't dead. The zoo vet mistook an illness for death and the low temperature put it basically into a coma. I assisted as an autopsy tech to help pay for school, and this has always stayed with me. A 13-year-old girl and her mother had been killed in a car accident. As standard procedure, I was removing the girl's clothes and processing the body, and I noticed a bulge in her underwear. When the underwear was removed, her unborn baby was half out of her, between her legs. The last thing I expected from a 13-year-old was a baby sticking out. Later in the autopsy, it was determined that her seatbelt was positioned too high, and at impact, the force upon the abdomen expelled the baby. Her underwear and pants kept the baby from being fully expelled. I met a medical examiner at a friend's party recently, and he told us that once he received the body of a cheese factory worker who fell and drowned in molten cheese. It was super awkward as the corpse they received was embedded in a chunk of cheese as it had cooled down. He said it felt like carving out a corpse from the leftovers of a fondue. I did a forensic pathology rotation in medical school in Florida. I was working there one day when they brought an old guy in who had been found in his apartment in the middle of the summer with no air conditioning after about a week. He had decomposed pretty quickly. When bodies decompose, the bacteria inside you eat the tissue and release gas, so bodies tend to be bloated. When they unzipped the body bag, I wasn't surprised to see that. But I was surprised to see that his scrotum was about the size of a football. No exaggeration. This apparently occurred via the same bacteria process. Anyways, they took a large bore needle and stuck it into the scrotum to let the gas escape. Then they took a lighter and lit the end of the needle. So as the gas was escaping from the scrotum, it burned like a blowtorch. It lasted for about 20 seconds. They justified the process by saying it decreases the smell in the lab. Talk about seeing things that very few other humans have. The scrotum blowtorch. I assisted with a post-mortem when I was a med student. A female patient died in her 40s. Her medical history had extensive complaints of abdominal pains. One doctor even referred to her as a hypochondriac, and others commented on apparent anxiety. We opened her abdomen and she had extensive scar tissue. She was absolutely massacred inside due to endometriosis. She suffered for decades and never got referred for a laparoscopy. She didn't have anxiety, she had a medical condition. A dude who compulsively ate coins had about $7 of change in his digestive system when we opened him up. He died choking on a quarter. I like to believe he died doing what he loved. In medical school, my group's cadaver was an 80-plus-year-old female who was extremely unfit. She was morbidly obese with muscles half the size of any other cadaver. We figured she was bedridden during her last few months, which would somewhat explain these findings. When we started our neurology unit and began to dissect the infratemporal fossa, I discovered a small metal pellet under the skin behind her right ear. My tank mates and I went on to find dozens of these metal pellets strewn around her head's anatomy, with some lodged into the cranium and others in the bones of her face. We contacted her living relatives to get some clarification, and they ended up revealing that when this lady and her brother were children, they said she was 8 years old. They were playing with an old decorative rifle that the family had mounted above the fireplace. Long story short, the brother accidentally fired the rifle into the girl's face. The aftermath was this lady was blind and wheelchair-bound for the rest of her life, and the pellets weren't all removed. It was an interesting dissection with that information from then on, but a sobering moment in reminding our class that our cadavers are humans with their own struggles and rich lives. If you're considering donating your body to science, please know that we don't take the responsibility lightly, and a million thanks aren't enough. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe to my channel for more content like this. This is Reddit Story Hour. Stay curious, stay kind, and see you in the next video.